In the previous lesson, we learned the fundamentals of strings in C#. In this lesson, we will learn about string parsing. We already learned that we can use numeric types in console.writeLine method calls and format the value, also known as transforming the value into a string representation. Parsing is the reverse operation of formatting. String parsing means taking a string's value and transforming it into another type. For example, a user inputs a number as a string, and we want to turn that string input into an integer variable. Let's define a string variable lucky number and assign your lucky number as a string value. Next, we define an int variable and name it parsed lucky number. We then use the int type and call the static parse method and provide the lucky number variable as its argument. We could do the same for different number types. For example, we can create another variable and use the double.parse method to parse a double from a string. Let's use the current temperature as an example. Before we debug the application to see the program in action, let's add another line at the end of the program. I add a console.readKey method call as the last statement of the program. Usually, when we debug a program, it completes after we step over the last statement. However, when we add another statement after our parsing, we can inspect the values before the program completes. It is a common debugging trick you can use. Now, let's set a breakpoint at the first line of the program and start the debugger. The lucky number variable is null, which means that it does not contain a value. We can step over the first line that will initialize the value of the variable using the F10 key in Visual Studio. In the locals window, we can see that the value has changed to 16. We see it highlighted with the red color in the value column. We can also hover over the variable in the code editor to see its current value. In the second line, we parse the string input into a number. Let's step over this line using the F10 key again. We see that the parsed lucky number variable now contains 16 as its value. Again, we can inspect the variable's value either in the locals window or by hovering over the variable name in the code editor. We press F10 again to step over the double parsing line as well. The temperature parsing also worked, and we now have the value of 30.7 in the double variable. As explained before, the debugger now sits on the console.readKey method call. We continue the program execution using F5. The application expects user input. However, we don't want to do it and close the application. One word of caution here. Decimal numbers aren't written the same everywhere in the world. For example, I just showed you an example of a temperature of 30.7 degrees. The parsing worked because the default culture of my system is Swiss German, which uses a point as a decimal point. However, there are other cultures. Let's create an instance of the culture info object and set the culture to German in Germany. We now provide this culture info object as the second argument in the double.parse method call. Let's set a breakpoint and start the program again. We can now see that the program ignores the decimal point and assigns 307 to the variable. The reason is that in Germany, they use a comma as the decimal point. Therefore, the point in the string is ignored and the value 307 is parsed. Let's change the value to represent the character used in Germany. Let's use a comma as a decimal point and run the application again. As you can see, we now have 30.7 degrees again in our double variable. But what if I keep the comma as a decimal point and remove the culture info object? Let's find out. We now run into a system.format exception with a message input string was not in a correct format. We get this error because we have a string that contains a character that does not match the format provided in the parser. In this lesson, we learned that parsing is the reverse operation of formatting. String parsing means taking a string's value and transforming it into another type. When parsing decimal numbers, the culture settings are important. You can use the default culture if the input is in the correct format, or set the expected format by providing a culture info object to the parser. String parsing is often required when processing user input or reading data from files.